Odium lives! I know some of you were hoping that Odium could become a major player going forward, that he could have a role like Jaws in the Bond films, and therefore you should be really stoked because he was definitely living and breathing in the preview for next week's episode. So get stoked for that. Apparently, Amalia just choked him out. She didn't actually kill him. Good news. Drew here, and this episode of The Nevers, entitled Undertaking, it had a lot going on. It was really, really busy as an episode. It was long, so there's way too much for me to cover all of it, but I'm going to cover the things that stood out to me as being the most interesting. If you thought other things were more interesting, tell me what you thought in the comments and I'll chime in. But to me, one of the most interesting things this episode was the revelations about Amalia. And obviously there have been a lot of hints about her character, that there is more to her than meets the eye. All the scenes where she's touching her face and where she says that it's not her face. And this episode, I think it seems pretty clear that the person who was formerly in Amalia's body died, that she committed suicide, and that somehow Amalia came with the ship and that she was left behind in this human body. I think that's pretty clearly what is going to be the reveal about this character. I think the pieces are there to figure that out, but they haven't explicitly stated it yet, so I could be wrong on this front. So the question then is, what is she? Probably an alien, but I'd be interested to hear if you guys had other theories. But this puts an entirely different wrinkle on her character. It would seem to me that she must have some of the human qualities of the person who formerly held this body still in place, but at the same time, I have to question, like, if this is the reveal that she is some kind of otherworldly creature, then why does she act so very human? In fact, why is she possibly the most human character in this show? I have to question that. But I thought that the way that they revealed Mary's message in the song through Myrtle's turn, I thought that was a brilliant piece of writing, and I feel like this episode and last episode they started to have a lot more interesting uses of the turns. And while I don't think they've gone deeper with them, I do think that just like seeing these interesting use cases has made them a lot more compelling. And having, Myrtle's ability be it has some limitations. She can't just translate anything to everyone else. She has to, have people around her who can understand whatever language she has to be speaking, or she just has to keep speaking incessantly until she reaches a point where she's speaking in English, I guess. But that could take a very, very long time. But I didn't catch all the different languages being spoken, but I feel like they definitely put a lot of effort into making it convincing that this character was speaking effortlessly in different languages. And the reveal of what Mary Song was saying, clearly we know there's that glowing orb underneath the earth that Dennis O'Hare's character and Lavinia Bidlow know about, and the main characters don't know about yet. And that seems to be what was speaking through Mary in this instance. And it's saying that they need to get there fast before Lavinia and Dennis O'Hare's character enact whatever sinister agenda they have in mind. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with that. I thought the other thing that really stood out to me in this episode was the twist with Lucy Best, that she was Lord Massen's spy in their midst. And kudos to the performance by Elizabeth Barrington. I thought about bringing her up last week because I thought that she was really striking as she acted out her sadness over this infant son that she accidentally killed because she didn't realize she had this turn. And to me, this was simultaneously, as someone who has children, this is just heartbreaking to imagine, and the way that Elizabeth Barrington acted these scenes where she talked about just the sadness of it, of watching her son struggle helplessly and die. It was very hard for me to listen to her say that. And I thought that this was actually just like a pretty clever twist. Like, we've been assuming that a lot of the twists in this show were exactly what they appeared to be and rather obvious, but it seems like they do have some very, very clever cards to play. And what made this a clever twist is that you would assume that all the people that are out against them are the people on the outside, And you would expect that to be because, people are othering them. Everyone's looking at them as someone to be feared because they are different. But Elizabeth Barrington's Lucy Best is touched. She has a turn. So for her to turn on her own group and to be helping Lord Massen, probably out of fear, because she knows what the turned are capable, what the touched are capable of because of her own turn, and she's frightened of what they will do to the world. And that's something really interesting, that her damage to her own son, what happened there, has made her leery of her own kind and turned her against them. I thought that they kind of copped out here. I felt like this show, it's been interesting the way they've shied away from the main characters doing truly dark things so far. And I guess this isn't an altogether unwelcome thing for me, because it doesn't really fit the tone of this show for Amalia to be pulling an Arya Stark level brutal killing of Lucy Best. But at the same time, in these situations, you do feel like the characters would probably be forced to do more brutal things than they've been forced to do so far. But I'm not unduly bothered by this, but I did think that they kind of did a cheat with this, where Amalia got ready to pull the trigger, and then Lucy Best used her powers to protect herself. So then, there was a moment where she would have killed Lucy, but then she thought better of it due to her relationship with Penance. More on Penance later, but I do think it's interesting that Penance is this character who is simultaneously the inventor of the group. That is her turn, which makes her, the most inventive person, and the one that has, an ability that masters science. But she's also a very devout person and a person of faith, and I think that's an interesting subversion, that the person that is the inventor in the group is also the more religious individual, because those two things don't typically go together. They can, but it's not typically what you see. I also thought that the scene between Amalia and Lord Massen was one of the highlights of the episode. I feel like Pip Torrens has done a really good job of making this individual, the writers too, but I feel like a lot of it comes down to Pip Torrens, of making this character someone that we can recognize as human. He's a complex character. I think that the level of villainy that he's been up to remains to be seen. The way that they framed this scene was fascinating, because he basically, if he did have Mary Brighton killed, he basically stated why and explained his motivation and gave a very, very clear outline of the reasoning behind it. But it was also ambiguous whether he was actually saying that it was him, or whether he was just articulating why someone else might have done it, or why he might have done it if he were going to do it. So it was an interesting scene, and I thought the chemistry between him and Amalia was just fantastic. And I think what makes Lord Massen such an interesting character is, he's lost a wife and he's lost a child, and we don't know what happened to his granddaughter. So he's this victim of tragedy. And as Pip Torrens puts it in the interview after the show, when you've lost things in your personal life, that makes you turn to things greater than yourself. In many people's case, it can be religious faith that sustains them in times like this. But for him, it seems he's turned to the idea of the British Empire, the old order, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that the touched don't interfere with that the progress that the show wants us to see them as representing doesn't interfere with the old way of things. And to me, there's something, even though I, fully acknowledge that it's all about power to some degree or another, I feel that there is something human about that and something touching about that. And the way that he plays the character, I think it's interesting, because so often you think that people like him, the reason that they are bigoted or set in their ways and opposed to change is because they haven't met people, because they don't understand, because they lack knowledge. But he seems like a very intelligent individual, and I think he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's chosen this path for all of his own reasons. It's a very, very intentional choice on his part, and I think that's a lot more interesting than someone who's just a bigoted numbskull. I also thought this episode, the character development of Frank Mundy continues to be good. I really like this character. I think that the way that you would never guess his dark secret based on the way he comports himself is one of the more interesting things about his character. And the fact that we find out he has this boxing background, that he was known as the Ape, I think that's another interesting twist for him. I like the fact that he's just a human, that he is an investigator and kind of representing law enforcement, but that he is someone that is ultimately seeking justice, as we see him taking a stand against his fellow officers as they move up to lynch Malady. And what's going to happen to her now that she's been captured remains to be seen, but I thought that his interaction with her, where he seemed in some ways to break through to her in ways that nobody else has been able to, was one of the more interesting interactions between Malady and any character in the show so far. And I'm definitely interested in seeing what they do with Frank Mundy going forward. It would be interesting for them to take this seemingly decent fellow and turn him into a villain, but it would also be interesting for him to stay a solid individual and a good, representative of the untouched. See what I did there? Penance and Augustus, I really liked their little moment together. I thought that it was maybe played for a little bit too much humor, but I do like the lighthearted spirit of this show. And the way that, they use this scene, I feel like in the first episode they went a little too far with Augustus, and to have him kind of quickly rebound and say that, he hasn't been able to get over what he did, it shows that he is a person who is not beyond hope, that he has a conscience. And the touching moment where he comes to think that maybe she cares for him, I thought that Tom Riley really did a fantastic job, communicating without saying exactly what he was thinking. And I'm definitely shipping these two. I don't ship that many couples, but I'm shipping these two. This episode, like I said, it was packed to the brim. I don't really have a lot of thoughts on this, but the character of Vinnie Heaven, the character played by Vinnie Heaven, Nimble, I wasn't too clear on what this character's power set was, but it definitely seems like they were playing up the chemistry between this character and Bonfire Annie. So it'll be interesting to see how exactly Nimble plays into things going forward. Clearly, Nimble works for the Beggar King and claims, of course, that the Beggar King just wants Odium back alive, and that, a lot of the other things being attributed to the Beggar King weren't actually carried out by him. And I suspect that's probably true. I probably was wrong in thinking that the Beggar King sent Odium last episode, because all things considered, it's a little bit too obvious, and the show is definitely less obvious than I thought it was initially. So those are my thoughts for what they're worth. I'm excited for next week's episode. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know which characters you're excited to see more of and what you theorize is going on with Amalia. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching.